right, so pressure is on with that kind of introduction, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background actually on myself and my own training, and I'll talk a little bit about my company at the end as well, just to give you an understanding of how this works in action. But I am Olivia, I'm the founder of Ethical Intelligence, and by training, I'm actually an AI ethicist. What that means is I am an ethicist, so I came from a background of philosophy, but I'm an ethicist and I work in the context of artificial intelligence and technology at large, but primarily AI and ML. So there will be a couple times in this talk where I will warn you, I'll speak like a philosopher, but what I'm trying to do is open up a couple different frameworks and methodologies, thought processes that I use in my day-to-day work. So let's get started. I'm talking today about ethics as a tool for innovation, which often catches people by surprise. Normally, when we think ethics, we think not doom and gloom, but a little bit of, oh, this is scary, and this machine misbehaved again, and there's this consequence here, and all of these negative aspects. It's very retroactive field at the moment. Well, the interesting thing is that only covers one side of ethics and how ethics can be used in technology. And I want to talk to you today about the other side. So the other side of the same coin. We're still talking ethics, but it's a little bit different. To start though, I want to pose the question to you. And I love usually asking this question to a full room of people, but right now it's a full room of Zoom. But ask yourself, what is ethics? How would you define this? And I always start every single talk. So if you've seen me talk before, you know I always start with this question. But what I like to do is get you thinking of what actually is ethics. It's a term that we use quite often. We bounce it around. It's, oh, I'm ethical and this is ethical. And of course I use ethics and I have values. But if you ask someone what is ethics, it's hard to come up with a definition. It's like asking someone, well, what is love? And they're sitting there going, well, I know what it is and I know what it's not, but I have a hard time defining it. Same thing with ethics. And again, I love asking this question because I get very different responses every single time I ask it. And I've gotten everything from ethics is a value system that helps us decide right and wrong. Ethics is subjective nonsense. I did get that once. Ethics is objective and the greater truth. And I always get some comment towards ethics tells us who to run over with the self-driving car. But that's to say there are very different understandings of ethics. And so I want to boil it down real quick to ethics is the study of right and wrong. And again, I'm warning you, this is a philosopher talking now at this moment. So ethics is actually this beautiful, it's a massive school of thought in philosophy. And it covers what is right, what is wrong, but it's broken down into three main fields. You have, oops, sorry, I had something come in the chat. I thought it was a question. You have three main fields. You have meta ethics, you have normative ethics, and you have applied ethics. And again, I'm a philosopher at the moment, but this will make sense in just a second. So meta ethics deals with questions of what is right, what is wrong. So when you're looking at meta ethics, you're trying to figure out, well, what are the wider values? Literally in terms of AI, in AI, it's what are the values that we want to see embedded into our technology. So in that case, is this a good piece of technology? Is this a bad piece of technology? Is this a good use case? Those are the kind of meta ethics questions. Then you have this layer called normative ethics, and normative ethics focuses on actions. So taking those values, those high level abstract values, and putting them into action. So this is a right action that I'm doing. This action, it helps me fulfill this value, versus this action is a wrong action. It is working against my end goal, against my values. And then you have applied ethics, which is actually where AI ethics sits. And that is when you take this kind of reasoning, so the values and the actions, and you apply it to a very specific context. In this case, the context is artificial intelligence, technology in general, but it's very applied. So what I'm doing when I'm working as an ethicist, I am looking at these high level values such as accountability, transparency, trust. You hear these bounced around all the time. Those actually mean something. Those are high level values. I'm taking those high level values, I'm going down to, well, what does accountability in action look like? Or what constitutes an action that would be transparent, helping me move towards transparency? And then again, that one step below of well, how does this work in terms of technology? What are the decisions that are being made in terms of the technology and the design and development deployment of my technology? So that is, and again, thank you for sitting through the little philosopher talk there. That is though the process that I go through as an ethicist. And that is why I say, and I give the short answer, again, I can get into hours of debates with my fellow ethicists of the study of right and wrong being the true definition of ethics, but that's how I like to boil it down, because it really shows, okay, we are trying to examine what is good and what is bad and use ethics as that decision-making tool. The other part to this definition that I like to add on, and this again comes from ancient Greek philosophers, but has a strong application to today. Ethics is the pursuit of the good life. So remember how I was saying that normative ethics, you're making decisions on what is a good action, what is a bad action, and what's a good versus a bad action has to do with, is this getting me closer to my values, or is it leading me away from my values? So this is what I mean in terms of ethics is the pursuit of the good life. Our life sits on a spectrum. We have worst possible outcome, best possible outcome. Worst possible outcome in this case would be everything's gone wrong in my life and I am not a very nice person. I don't feel like I live true to myself, and things have just in general gone wrong based off of my own actions. I've made poor decisions. I am not a trustworthy person. I'm not honest. So on. I'm now projecting my own values into this description, but that's how I would describe my worst possible outcome for my life. My good life, my most fulfilling life, is on the other end of the spectrum, the best possible outcome. And in that case, I would be living towards my values. I would be making steps towards pursuing my purpose in life. And I would be living that through in action in ways that uphold what I find as valuable. So for me, honesty is very important. Honesty and loyalty are two very important values. So my good life would be one in which that I am an honest and loyal person. Ethics is really that decision-making tool that's helping me in my life understand these are my values and these are the actions that I use. What does this have to do with technology? Well, our technology exists on the exact same spectrum. We have worst possible outcome and best possible outcome for our technology. And I work a lot with startups and founders, and I like to describe the worst possible outcome as the dumpster fire, meaning everything's gone wrong. You know, you'll hear founders especially, but a lot of people that work in technology will say, you know, I'm putting out fires all day. Now imagine the whole company is on fire. That would be the worst possible outcome. You know, the technology that you have created is causing harm to your user base. You have been hit with different fines. Legally, you've messed up in terms of compliance. Your employees are upset and feel unmotivated and taken advantage of. That is the worst possible outcome, you know, working in our technology. So in most cases, and how ethics is currently more or less talked about, is being able to prevent those situations, prevent the worst possible outcome. But if all you're doing is preventing, you're only meeting the middle ground. You're only sitting right at the middle of the spectrum. You're missing an entire other end. And that's where ethics comes into play. So again, we're using ethics as this decision-making tool, moving away from the worst possible outcome towards the best possible outcome. In the case where it's the worst possible outcome, ethics is used as a tool for risk mitigation. So what this means is I am looking at different situations saying, well, that decision is going to lead to harm to your user base, or that is taking advantage of your employees, or that use case for your technology has negative impact, negative societal impact that you're not taking into account. Again, that's fine, but let's retroactively fix it, or it's very preventative. That's only one side of the spectrum. The other side is ethics as a tool for innovation. What I mean by this is the best possible outcome is when your technology is going above and beyond what you could possibly even imagine or had set out to do, where it is bringing benefit to your stakeholders, is bringing benefit and can even say joy to your user base, but it's not taking advantage. It's not we'll see like when we have different technology where the goal is to get the user almost addicted to their screen, where the more time the user spends on the screen, the better, even though that is detrimental to the user's well-being. That would not be a good best possible outcome for a piece of technology. Instead, it would be a piece of technology that's going, okay, this is putting my user's well-being first and foremost at the heart of what I'm designing for. All of that is actually using ethics as that decision-making tool. What you're doing is you're sitting down going, what are my values? What are my mission? What's my mission? What is my end goal and purpose of this technology? And then how do I make the key decisions along the way to align my technology with those values and with that mission? It's quite easy, especially in technology with the fast iteration cycles, when we are putting out a new feature, putting out a new iteration, going, to forget and drift. Actually, there's something called ethical drift, where you move away from the values and the mission that you originally set out to uphold. And what happens is you get further and further away from that purpose, from that mission, that value, by having the check back and looking and going, well, can I actually use this value to help me grow further? Can I actually, am I actually aligned with this value as I'm designing and as I'm innovating? That keeps you on track away from that ethical drift. So really, this was to show you the breakdown of how ethics, yes, can be used as this risk mitigation tool. You have the compliance side to it. You have the retroactive, fix things when they're broken. But it's also a fantastic tool when used in the proper sense to actually open up oftentimes even new streams of revenue, which I know sounds ironic to hear an ethicist talking about revenue. But in the business case, and when you're working with a company, you have to be very aware that, you know, the one of the primary purposes of a business is to bring in revenue, to make money. How can you do that in a way that aligns with your values, but also how can you do that in a way that opens up new benefit for your customers as well? So let's go a little bit further into a couple of blockers that happen when I'm talking about ethics and innovation. Because oftentimes when I say, oh, ethics, I'm an ethicist, or let's use ethics in this situation, I get this pushback of, well, that's just going to hinder our innovation. We can't do that. We don't want to do that. That's going to get in the way. Ethics hinders innovation. It's a common phrase that I've heard over the years and still hear today. Less so, thankfully, but still here today. So I want to debunk this myth really quick. And I want to start by actually just defining innovation. So innovation is quite literally the introduction of a new idea, process, or feature that benefits the company. So this is innovation. Innovation doesn't mean freedom to do whatever you want and carte blanche to, you know, run around and try different things and see what happens. That is a process for innovation, but that's not actually innovation. Innovation really is just this introduction of a new idea, process, feature that benefits the company at the end of the day. Very different here. Now, I also want to describe and dig into quickly the difference between iteration and true innovation. Since recently, and this is a bit of a critique to, I'm sitting currently in San Francisco, so this is a bit of a critique towards some of the innovation culture here, but we've moved away from true innovation. True innovation is something disruptive, which I know you're probably cringing hearing that word as well. You know, we're all disrupting something with technology. What that is true disruption. So you're bringing a brand new market into play, or you're bringing a brand new piece of technology or process or something that hasn't been seen before. Nowadays, a lot of what we used to call innovation is really just iteration, meaning you're introducing a new feature that's already been developed, or you're introducing a new iteration, so version 2.0 or something like that. That is iteration innovation. It's not actually true innovation. What I mean by this is, you know, you introduce dark mode to your application, or you introduce stories. I am criticizing a little bit social media at the moment here, but you're introducing something that another company's already done, and you're just bringing it to your app. Yes, that is technically innovation, but it's iterative innovation. It's introducing features and small updates. that's not necessarily the innovation that we originally set out to do. And so we've gotten stuck in this cycle of iteration. The reason we've been stuck in this cycle of iteration is, well, when you're designing your technology, a lot of times, especially in the startup field, is you're designing because you want to exit the company or be bought up. And the best way to do that is to create a software or a piece of technology that isn't necessarily true innovation, new to the market, completely new, but is instead an improvement to another piece of technology or an improvement to something that already exists for a bigger company, hence iteration. So there's a difference between these two. Ethics helps in terms of iterative innovation by analyzing, again, I'm going to bring it back to ethics, by analyzing, okay, does this iteration actually align with our values? Does this iteration actually get us closer towards the company mission? Or even when I'm saying values and company mission, societal values even, or the direction that we want to, well, progress and mature as humans. Is this iteration getting us closer, or is it getting us further away? So ethics works powerfully in iterative innovation by analyzing for that ethical drift that I was talking about earlier. It's ensuring that as the iterations and the features are developed, we're not drifting further and further away, following, we'll say, the shiny coin, versus ensuring that what we're designing for is actually aligned with what we want. So ethics works powerfully in terms of iterative innovation, but it also works in terms of true innovation. And I like to throw in the whole caveat of ethics itself as an introduction into a company is true innovation, since it is introducing a new idea or process quite often into a company that in the long term will always benefit the company. What ethics is doing now in terms of true innovation is actually looking at fields that haven't been touched before, because they haven't necessarily been thought of as at first glance as lucrative, or there weren't clear revenue streams. Now what ethics is allowing us to do in terms of true innovation is look at fields such as climate change, such as the ESG factors and climate change and environmental impact. There are new designs going in there. There's true innovation happening there by people saying, well, we value our climate. We value the ability to live and exist in this world, and we want a strong, healthy planet. Well, how can we design our technology to uphold that? It's just shifting a bit of your mindset, going, how can I change this? How can I apply my technical knowledge to better reach my values and my purpose? So again, that's how ethics works for both true innovation and iterative innovation, both of which are very different types and styles of innovation, both of which, though, the introduction of ethics is incredibly beneficial. And I want to go a little bit further actually into a bit of that true innovation side to things, with dispelling another myth that I often run across, is that constraints are an obstacle for innovation. You know, if you want to introduce something new, you want to make sure that there's no constraints, that you get to talk about, you know, there's you want the freedom to explore and create, and that is true. You do want that ability to explore an idea, or that ability to pursue different thoughts, but constraints actually in this case help. So here's a quote from Harvard Business Review, that constraints can foster innovation when they represent a motivating challenge and focus efforts on a more narrowly defined way forward. I'm just going to skip ahead a slide here already and say ethics. I'm going to cross out constraints and put ethics. And what I mean by this is not that ethics is holding back creativity or holding back innovation or holding us back. What it's doing is it's targeting our creativity. It's refining what we're designing for, rather than having free reign. It's going, well, take all of that thought and all of that ideation and point it here. And that actually, in that process, increases creativity, increases that innovative muscle, we'll say. For example, if I were to ask you, pull out a blank sheet of paper and draw me something, you would sit there and you'd freeze and you'd go, what am I going to draw? Like, I guess I'll draw a dog, or like you'd start looking around your desk and going, well, I'll draw this, I guess. I don't know. What do I draw? and it takes you longer. You're sitting there and you're trying to figure it out, and you'll come with, maybe a nice little cartoon dog or something that you're used to drawing, but not necessarily very in depth, very detailed, lots of structure to it. Now, instead, if I sat here and I said, and you had that piece of paper and I said, draw me a picture of your favorite pet wearing a dress. All of a sudden, I know that sounds very silly and it's coming off the top of my mind. So maybe I should question my creativity for this morning, that's what I've come up with for today. But all of a sudden you have direction, and you're sitting down and you're going, okay, well, I know exactly what I need to draw, and how I'm going to draw this is really more the question. I'm looking at, okay, what kind of dress do I want my dog in? Do I want it? Is it a pink dress? Suddenly you have more direction. Your creativity is being targeted. So instead of having like a kind of stick figure dog sort of drawn, when you have no direction, you're going to a very full picture of your favorite dog, of your favorite pet, in a dress. Which again sounds like a very silly example now that I've said it out loud, but I'm trying to, it's mainly to illustrate the point that having those constraints aren't actually constraints. They are guidelines for your creativity. So what I like to tell people when it comes to ethics and technology is, we know our technical limitations, and we push those technical limitations all the time, but we know what our technology is and is not capable of. There are certain laws of physics that keep us within a certain square. Now, when you're looking and thinking about technical limits, you have 4 sides to a square. Nice little square. I have to meet whatever problem, I have to find a solution for whatever problem I'm designing for. And it has to fall within these four lines, because that's technically what is capable. Now imagine you have your technical limitations, and you wouldn't see those as constraints. You wouldn't see that as, well, this is hindering my innovation. What you see that as is guidelines of, okay, I can't do it this way because my technology won't, but I can't, it's technically infeasible, but I can be very creative and figure out a way around that so that technically speaking, this works. Or it's technically feasible, excuse me. It's technically feasible. So that, again, your technical limits aren't constraints in that case. They're really helpful. What you're doing is you are forcing yourself to become more creative, to be able to design a solution for your problem in a way that is technically feasible. Now imagine you have that square, four lines. Imagine introducing ethical limitations. All of a sudden, you're taking this 2D, very flat understanding of what you need to design for, and you're popping it out into this 3D box. And all of a sudden, you're going, I see it from all angles now. And I have to somehow design a solution that fits within a very robust understanding of what is capable and what it is not. And again, ethics is now coming in and giving you further guidance, saying, okay, I can collect this data. I can collect this data to reach this end goal. But however, in collecting, the process that I'm looking to collect that data in is a violation of my user's privacy. What can I do so that my user's privacy isn't violated? All of a sudden, you're having to be more creative. You're not being constrained here. You are actually forcing yourself to be even more innovative to make sure that you are able to collect that data, but in a way that respects your user's privacy. It's like putting up more requirements that, again, foster this sense of creativity, foster innovation. And that's one of the things I really want to hammer in on is ethics. Ethics is not that hindrance to innovation. It actually helps target innovation and helps keep you on track in a way that ensures that the technology that you're creating confidently will actually have a good impact on your user base, but also society at large, how it works in the larger ecosystem. So a couple of closing remarks here. Innovation in action is really just designing with ethics in mind. There's lots of different ways to do this. There's lots of different methods. One of the things, and this is a small pitch for ethical intelligence, we specialize in ethics and innovation. We love to work with companies that actually are really brave enough to be able to say, look, we know this is going to be a very important aspect of our way forward in the future. We need to focus on this and actually taking lead. And again, technology exists on a spectrum. What we're doing is ensuring that it's not going to that worst possible outcome, but that's only half of our job. The other half is actually making sure that your technology is moving towards the best possible outcome, and you're actually leading in the field that you are in. So at the end of the day, and this is my nice little pitch, ethics as a tool for innovation is really just the pursuit of good tech. So remember how at the very beginning, I asked you, what is ethics? And we went over, well, it's the study of right and wrong in the pursuit of the good life. Well, ethics in action and technology is understanding what is a good decision and a bad decision in terms of your technology development, but it's in the pursuit of good tech at the end of the day. So hopefully, yes, there we go. Here is how to get in touch if you want further information. Open for questions now as well. Let's see, I'm going to make sure I have the Q&A open as I say this, but please feel free to reach out and get in touch. I will ramble a little bit about the company at the moment as we wait for questions to come in. But yes, ethical intelligence, here's how to get in touch. We have a couple different webinars and resources, as well as services and products if you're interested.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Olivia. Your presentation style is fantastic, first of all. I must admit, I did struggle with that first question in terms of what is ethics. And it was one of those, exactly as you said, I know what it is, but can I actually verbalize what it is? And we'll go from there. So as Olivia's mentioned, the Q&A is open. We are lucky to have her with us. If you do have questions, please jump in there. In the meantime, I mean, I've got a couple of questions of my own, I guess, just to get things started. So, I mean, first of all, you're quite right in that I tend to come at the place of ethics from the position of things going wrong or risk or, you know, bad practices in an industry and stuff like that. So actually flipping on its head and actually innovating within constraints. Actually, I actually struggle with it, if I'm perfectly honest, at first, just to kind of flick my brain into that mindset. In terms of that way of thinking, do you think it applies to companies of all sizes and to individuals, or do you see use cases where it fits, you know, better industries or companies or whatever best?
That's actually a great question. So in terms of, again, because I've worked with large enterprise and everything from a small startup, not out of their garage, but that similar metaphor. So that kind of flipping on your head innovation with those constraints works incredibly well for smaller companies, startups, SMEs in their design phases, when they're designing the technology, when they're figuring out the constraints of the technology and its use cases. Then it is quite a powerful tool. Again, design of technology, it's very focused there. When we're talking about larger enterprise, we're looking more at processes. We're looking more at how can we essentially set up, again, in design and development, but set up teams to be able to go, well, here are my constraints that I'm working within and making sure that they stay on track. Really though, it's less dependent on the size of the company and more on the product lifecycle where they are in that process. Excuse me. And when you're flipping it on its head, again, innovation and constraints on its head, it's most powerful in the design phases. Once you move into development and deployment, then it's more just ensuring that you are carrying out what the decisions you made in the design. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We have got 3 questions come in, which is great to see. So thank you, Natasha, Teresa, and Alice. I will also just shout out in the chat. We've had Andrew and David in the chat saying, you know, great talk. So yeah, really appreciate you jumping into the chat just to say that. It is a bit of a funny one when you're online and you can't see, is there anyone out there listening to me? So thanks for jumping in the chat and saying thank you. And if there's any more thank yous, please do fire them over. Yeah, you can read along with these questions at the same time, Olivia, if that will help. But I will start with that top question from Natasha. Question from Natasha is, are you optimistic that this is something tech companies are starting to consider?
Yes, I'm actually very optimistic. I'm very, very optimistic, and it's something that's really exciting for me because I've been in this field for a while.
Mhm.
And I went from introducing myself as I'm an AI ethicist and people going, what is that? Or confused looks, or what? No. To now I'll introduce, yes, I'm an ethicist, and people go, fascinating. I have so many questions for you. So even just the general public knowledge of what ethics means in technology has changed and grown. It's improved. You have digital literacy, you have ethical literacy as well that complements that. So the general market as well is now starting to demand companies to take ethics into consideration. And what that's doing is forcing a lot of companies, not forcing, but putting that pressure on companies to take it seriously. The great thing though is we've already been working with companies, and we're seeing more and more companies like this come to us saying, look, we know first of all that this is going to be important, but also second of all, I want to be able to look in the mirror at the end of the day and be proud of what I'm doing. And this is a way for me to be able to do that. Not saying that you can't be proud of yourself anyway, but we've worked a lot with people primarily who have come from either working in big tech or have already founded a startup in the past. We work a lot with these kind of clients who come to us saying, I've been through the ringer. I've seen, I have a quote actually from one of our clients who said, I've seen really good people do really questionable things just based off of once you're in those feedback cycles, once you're in those loops, when you're working, it can be hard to address these kind of issues, especially if the company doesn't make time and space for it. And he's like, I don't want to do that. I want to do this right from the get-go. We're seeing more and more clients come to us from that way. I'm talking to more and more people as well in the field that have that perspective. We have a growing number of ethics firms that actually are getting funding nowadays, which is amazing. So it's moving in the right direction. I am very optimistic that this is becoming something serious. And if a company doesn't take it serious, they're not going to be around in 5 years because the market is taking it serious.
Yeah, perfect. And I think we see it from an employee perspective. More and more people they're looking at their employer and saying, do I want to work with this organization? Do they align with my values? So yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. Next question there from Teresa. Teresa kicks off by saying she loved the talk. So we love to hear that, Teresa. Thank you very much. How do you think different stakeholders can measure or monitor ethics? Do you think AI can help?
So yes and no. Yes and no in terms of AI can help. So AI, how we conceptualize it is it's a tool. It's a tool to help provide us with the information to make our own decisions. Ethics is something that is very closely related to who we are as people. It can also be a highly emotional topic at times. And that's important to respect. We don't need to remove the emotions from ethics. Actually, emotions help us understand when something's wrong. If we're feeling angry or sad or frustrated by something, that's a great trigger to go, well, why? What's going on there? Why do I feel that way? And then dig into it to figure out what decisions are leading to this? What impact is leading to this? Can AI help measure or monitor ethics? There are ways to have it help us monitor the decisions that we're making in terms of kind of like a database where you're able to check back and going, what kind of decisions have I made in the past? The importance here is not to automate that though, because what that does is it freezes us in time. There's something called moral maturity. So as humans, as we grow, as we make decisions in terms of morality, as we make ethical decisions, we see the consequences. And then there's an important step where we actually improve our decisions based off of the consequences that we've seen, and we grow. And that's called moral maturity. If what we do is automate those decisions, we're freezing our understanding of ethics and morality in time. We're not improving. We're just automating. We're just making more decisions in the same place instead of growing in our decisions. So there are ways for AI to help us in terms of, we'll say, audit and trace and track the decisions that we've made in the past, ethical and moral decisions that we've made in the past, and then allow us as humans to sit down and go, okay, we made this decision. It resulted in X, Y, and Z. Are we happy with X, Y, and Z, or is there a way that we can improve that decision and grow again further? So it's using AI as a tool to help monitor. I wouldn't necessarily say measure, I wouldn't say necessarily measure. They're you know, they're indicators, but again, keeping it as a tool where we as humans are still the critical thinkers in that process.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much for that. The questions are coming in now, which is good to see. So we will keep firing through them, which is great. Question from Alice. Again, thanks for a great talk. Could you share any examples of innovations developed from ideas prompted by ethical concerns?
Ooh, okay. I've got two that I know. I love this kind of question. So I have two really fun ones, actually. So these both come out of client projects. So one, we were working with a company that wanted to basically, the motivation of the company was to allow, it's a marketplace for 5-minute phone calls where you can call anyone in the world and have direct access to basically people that you wouldn't necessarily have access to before, and ask their advice. And one of the huge motivations of one of the founders was, he was thinking, well, you know, teenagers that are trying to figure out careers, can they reach out to someone? Can they be able to call someone and get to know people? And what happened is, we came in and we said, that motivation is a good motivation. However, there are serious concerns in terms of child data and risk that's associated there. How can we still reach that end goal? Well, we looked at it and that went, well, actually, what you can do is have school-sponsored events where you have pre-selected and vetted advisors on the platform, but it's like a little mini career day. And you can go to universities through that and high schools through that, and open this ability up digitally for those students to be able to have that direct communication. And all of a sudden it was, oh, well, of course we can offer that. And so again, that was a very innovative approach to how that product would be delivered. Another example is with a company that develops an open source platform. And one of the concerns, and this was a massive project in terms of figuring out the ethical implications of it, but they develop an open source platform. And one of their concerns, it's an open source platform that that platform itself is used to create chatbots. And one of the concern was, well, what if that chatbot has problems or it's misused? Or what if you know, one of the open source developers, because it is open source, anyone can access the code, takes that platform and tries to make a chatbot for therapy and it goes all wrong and all these things. We have no control over how that platform, what the chatbots are being created to do. And we sat there and we went, okay, well, you don't have control over what the developers are doing in terms of the chatbots, but you do have the control and the resources to research what is a good chatbot and what is an ethical chatbot, an ethical use of a chatbot versus not. And then you do have the resources to teach those developers. You have open source education on your technical capacities for chatbots. You can also open source education for your ethical capacities for your chatbots. And all of a sudden, again, the company went, that's fantastic. We're going to this is going to create an even stronger community for our open source developers at the end of the day. So that's just two examples, two very basic examples.
Yes, it's clear. It's one of those, exactly as you've described. You know, there is a constraint there. There is a risk there. How do we innovate? And yeah, it sounds great. And I love the idea of that 5-minute phone call as well. That sounds good.
Calling anyone if you want to check them out.
They're called what, sorry?
Anyone, yeah.
Okay, I'm in. This sounds like the sort of thing that I would get involved with, to be honest. So I'll give it a go. In terms of the questions that are there, I'm actually going to save Lutho's question perhaps till last. I think that's quite a nice talking point to finish with. So we'll keep going. In terms of Ali's question, I'll kind of summarize it a little bit, but essentially Ali's question basically saying within AI technologies, quite often people focus on, you know, their product goals. They're not always as focused about, you know, any side effects or ethical concerns. And he's basically asking, you know, what can be done to mitigate it. So I think quite often within the data world, you can end up with a black box, a machine learning algorithm that just does whatever. No one really knows how it works, whatever. It is slightly different to your talk. I appreciate that, but have you got any tips from that side of things?
Yeah. And so reading this as well and interpreting Ali's point as well, in addition to black box. This will loop in here. Do not pay much attention to ethics as long as their product goals have been met. One of the things to do is part of your product goals actually establish those as value driven or value aligned goals. You can still set those goals so that they are embedded with the ethical values at the end of the day. That's one way to have that consideration made. Another aspect as well is actually making time and space for these discussions within a company and within your, even oftentimes we work in the agile life cycle or product management cycle. There are key points within that cycle that you can actually create time and space for your team to address these questions. One of the things that I met with constantly is people saying, well, I just don't have time. Like I'm on this timeline, I must meet these KPIs, I must meet these goals. Well, you can make time, not you as the employer, but the product manager or the management level. If you're taking it seriously, then you make the time. And that may just be an hour at the end of every life cycle to be able to go through. And it's as simple as that, because these questions are on your employees' minds. I can't tell you how often we sit down with a company and all of a sudden we go from 2 people on a call to 15 because the company went, I've been trying to have this discussion and I just didn't know where to have this. And then we have everyone on the call going, you too? And everyone, it's on their minds. And so the fact with the black box, that's a question that comes up all the time. If you're approaching that as a company and going, okay, well, this is a concern to us, the explainability of this black box system, well, then at least now we have 15 people instead of just one person feeling alone. We have 15, we have the entire team going, well, how can we adjust this? And does this actually need to be explained, or is it okay? Is it okay that it's not explainable? There are cases where that is okay. I'm not a black and white answer in terms of it must always be completely transparent or you're fine. But if you create time and space within the company to address these issues, you're utilizing really the brain power that's there to be able to address issues like the black box problem.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much for that. The question there from Jeffrey, again, I'm going to paraphrase slightly. Jeffrey's asking, how ethical are the top tech companies, specifically the FANG? But I guess, broadly speaking, it'd be quite interesting to know whether you think particular industries need the most focus in terms of these ethical questions, or whether it's just across the board.
Across the board, yes. That's a blanket yes. Right now, health and fintech are probably the 2 industries with the highest risk, and so we see they also have a robust regulations behind them, but they are the highest risk. So we see it quite often, health and fintech having and needing a lot of guidance in terms of ethics.
Yep.
The one that I would say probably needs it the most and is kind of opening up to it, but definitely not the bigger tech ones, at least putting into action, would be really the social media and advertising industry needs to be to use the Silicon Valley terminology needs to be disrupted, really, truly. There is a great piece written actually by a man named Dave Lauer. He is the founder of Urban AI, and it's published on Springer. It's open source, but he actually dissects the fact that Facebook's business model at its root right now is unethical, and so anything that they do is still stuck on that route. So that also answering Jeffrey's a bit there as well. That's a great piece to read. Perfect.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Question from Nigel. First of all, this is a lovely compliment, so we definitely have to read this one out. Nigel says, wow, I love it when a speaker gets me to ask myself so many questions. Thank you. It's not really a tech question, but do you think there's anything inherently more or less ethical about the public and private and third sectors? So yeah, do you see differences between the public and private sector when it comes to ethical decision making?
It's different decisions. I wouldn't say that one is more ethical or less ethical. I'll actually give a little bit of a personal antidote here. So ethical intelligence EI, my company, we are a private company, which a lot of other firms in the space are public or NGOs. And so I used to get, and I still get the question all the time, and I've gotten this a couple of times of, well, isn't it unethical to have a privately held for-profit ethics company? And what I explain to people there is, I'm not charging someone for me to tell them that they're an unethical person. Myself and my colleagues, we have a very specific, nuanced skill set. So it's more private. There's no problem in having private or publicly held. There's no problem with profit or non-for-profit. It's just understanding what the purpose of it behind that is. And again, they're onto the public and privately held aspects as well. There are some frustrations, and there are some specific issues to privately held and the kind of decisions that go behind that and influences that the different stakeholders can have. But again, it doesn't make it more or less ethical. It just means that there are different influences, different considerations to be making, and just having that knowledge that, well, when it is privately held, one individual can have a much bigger say. And if that individual is pushing for something that is not necessarily aligned with societal values or societal needs, then it becomes, that's where the ethical challenges start to come into place. But there's no inheritance, at least from what I've researched, between the public and private. But that's actually a great question. I've never had that one before. Thank you, Nigel. Perfect.
Yes, well done, Nigel. Love that one. Thank you. We will come to the last question, and then we'll draw things to a close. So Lutho's question is essentially, where do you see ethics in tech, 5 to 10 years from now, assuming the current growth of tech remains the same? What do you see happening in the future? We'll put you on the spot to make a prediction.
Well, let me start with, I'm biased, obviously, with this answer. But I see it taking the role, and I'll actually speak about the role of like the process role, the role of an ethicist even. When data science first came out, you had people, data science first started coming into the space was, well, what is this? What is this title? What do you do? Now it's one of the first hires that you take on. And now you have entire teams and departments of data scientists. So it went from, what is this, to we have a data festival right now even, and I'm sure there's plenty of data scientists in attendance. And so it's just assumed. It's not even, do you have a data scientist? It's like, how many do you have? That kind of question. In terms of the role of an ethicist, and where I see this field progressing is in 5 to 10 years from now, it's going to be, well, who's your ethicist, or who is the head of your ethics department or your team? That in terms of the process, and procedural in terms of more team-based, that I see growing and already growing. We're going from this being a non-existent title to something that there are people being employed underneath the title of chief ethics officer, head of ethics, or even responsible innovation. This will, in 5 to 10 years, no longer be, well, do you have an ethicist? Do you have someone that's in charge of this? To who is, and how many people do you have on that team? Another thing that I see progressing as well is the need and the use case for ethics boards. And ethics boards in terms of expert panels to be able to consult with as these challenges develop and grow. One of the fascinating things, the very cool things about technology is it does move fast, and we have new challenges coming up daily. And the great thing as well with that is when you are working with an ethics board, or you have a panel, or you have your ethicists or consultants that you're working with, you have the ability to take on these challenges, and you have that flexibility. So I do see this being a standard. We may go the route of some type of certification. I don't know. That one has been a question for years now. It may be that there is some type of scoring of, well, do you incorporate a scoring in terms of how well you embed ethics into the company culture and the processes and the technology. I could see that kind of like we have B Corp right now, where it's a certification. But that I see definitely more in terms longer term. But whatever it is, I will say, and this is my biased answer, but bias in terms of the trends that I'm seeing just in my day-to-day work, that ethics is here to stay, and it's going to be taking a bigger and bigger role as we go forward.
Yeah, I must admit, like many of your answers, that is not something that I'd previously considered, but hearing you describe it, it makes perfect sense. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing with us. That does kind of draw things to a close there, actually. So great content, fired through 7 questions, and I think you've left everyone thinking further, if I'm perfectly honest, that there's probably a few more internal questions that people are thinking about. So thank you very much, Olivia, for coming to share with us. Just a super quick one, just to wrap things up. It's been, as mentioned at the start, really fantastic, really enjoyable online part to the Data Science Festival. If you are joining us in London, please do say hi. If not, I really hope all of you have a great end to the year, the end to 2021, and hopefully you get the chance to join us as we start to run some events going into next year. So we will draw things to a close. Thank you very much, Olivia, again. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we will close things off from here. I'll say goodbye, and all the best to everyone. Thank you very much for tonight.
Thank you, David, and thank you all for your questions.
Perfect. Goodbye.